Hello, everyone. This is Barry Heidowitz. I'm a director at Extreme Labs. Today we've got Saul Patino presenting on the world of Microsoft Cloud frameworks. We're going to give people just one more moment to join, and then we'll get started. By the way, and I'll repeat this too, but throughout the webinar, feel free to type in any questions in the either the chat or the Q&A section, and what I'll do is I'll bring them to those questions to Saul's attention, and he'll address them as time permits. Otherwise, what I'll also do is I'll provide my contact info, and Saul will also be providing his contact info during the webinar. Actually, yeah, let's get started. So I'll put my contact info too. If there are any questions about the webinar that you think of afterward, you can also shoot me an email or email Saul, and we'll take it from there. Otherwise, Saul, please go ahead, take over, and yeah, let's get this going.
I appreciate it, Barry. Good afternoon, everyone. So I want to talk about Microsoft Cloud frameworks. With you could say the fast forwarding of what AI has done to us, I think it's very important to understand that it's a very new technology, and like any new technology, one of those first steps are those guardrails, right? And so Microsoft has plenty of frameworks that they use to be able to guide customers and their clients and their partners to create a healthy environment. So it's going to be a practical overview for architects and engineers. It's going to be very high level, but I think it's going to be very informative. So again, my name is Saul Patino. Now I'm a multi-cloud architect and strategist. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer. I work with, I'm a cloud solutions architect for CBTS in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, I'll bring over 15 years of experience leading cloud transformation, migrations, hybrid environments, and obviously architecting in various different clouds, including public and private clouds. My expertise lies more in designing and multi-cloud architecture. And what I try to do with our customers is make sure that we provide a architectural design and diagram that's fundamental to grow, right, to expand, because that is one of the benefits of having a public cloud environment is the elasticity. So what is a framework? Well, when we talk about a framework, first of all, we have to understand that they're not rules, it's not a prescription, it's guidance. These frameworks aren't meant to provide patterns and best practices. This way, a team can adapt and grow and scale. It's by design, it's meant to be continuous, right? I'll start alluding to the cloud journey here in a minute, but cloud adoption is continuous. Frameworks are meant to support improvements across strategy, readiness, operations. Many times when we talk about what's a customer's requirements, what's a partner's requirement, we have to understand that those requirements will change in time. So when we talk about these frameworks and this adoption and how we work in cloud, we have to understand that it's continuous and it can change. Alignment to business outcomes is very important. Like I just stated, each pillar maps back to some type of business value. Now, some businesses value cost, right? They need to be able to grow, but with a limited budget. Other people depend on their environment, right? Their reliability. Will it be up during the Christmas season? Will it be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Other people are concerned with security, right? If you start thinking about markets like financial, like health institutions, right? Security is very important. And then others need just speed of delivery. So it should align to whatever business outcome you need. And then most of these are going to be complementary. They're not going to be competing. You'll have some overlaps in some of the frameworks that we're going to talk about. But for the most part, again, you have to align to what the business outcome and requirements are. So the first one is that cloud journey I was referring to. The cloud adoption framework is meant to be a journey. It's meant to guide a company or a partner within their cloud journey. the first part before you even step foot into the cloud is a strategy, right? What's your motivation to go to the cloud? Is it a migration? Does it cost? Is it the security? Is it old hardware? You have to have a business case and you have to have an adoption project, right? And so these are core fundamentals that the cloud adoption framework is going to teach you. Afterwards, it's the planning, it's the readiness, and then it's the actual adoption where you migrate or you innovate or you modernize your current workload. Now, this journey is continuous because after you hit those 4 plateaus, the next part is just a circle that goes between governance, security, and management. You add new environments, you have to make sure they're governed 24/7, you have to make sure they're secure 24/7, and then you manage it. It's going to have an adoption life cycle. Some applications have a life cycle that spans a few months, maybe a couple of years. There's others that are going to span a very long time. But it's very important to understand that all these different components will go through this cloud adoption. Now, there are some very useful tools in Microsoft Learn documentation. The Agile Architecture Center will show a lot of different architecture designs and how they're implemented from the beginning to the start. Very visual, which helps people that learn visually. There's also the well-architected framework documentation, specifically in Microsoft Learn, that will deep dive in exactly how this works. And then the landing zones, which I will call out landing zones because the landing zone is actually one of the first components that you should be adopting before you actually migrate, right? The landing zone, what it does is it gives you governance and it gives you a sense of stability. Most of the time, I like to describe it as a foundation. It's going to include identity management. It's going to include your governance, right? It's going to include Azure policy, but then it also includes of how you're going to start structuring your environment, your subscriptions, your resource groups, and all those components. Now, some of the key disciplines are going to be the strategy, like I mentioned. It defines your motivation. Then you have to plan. You have to get ready, right? And this is where I think it's very important to consider landing zones. And then you have your migration, right, where you're actually either going to be optimizing your environment, you're going to be promoting workloads, whatever the case may be. And then the innovate component is, well, some of those environments you actually have to modernize a little bit more, right? Or you do not want to lift and shift an environment. You want to optimize before you get in there, right? So you want to innovate. You want to make sure that you're giving yourself room to grow. And you do not want to lift and shift and then realize that the cloud environment is much more expensive than you first proposed because you did not complete your journey. The journey should never end with a lift and shift. The journey should always be the full journey, which would end in the innovate stage, right? You optimize, you use cloud native apps, you refactor, provision. And then the last part that I said was rinse and repeat was the govern, secure, and management, right? This is where you actually start applying specific guardrails and then you hold true to that. Now, the landing zones, like I mentioned, they're pre-configured scalable environment foundations for all your workloads. We won't dive too much into that because there is a lot of documentation on this, but the main purpose of this is because it's going to leave that foundational structure for your management groups, your subscriptions, your networking, right? So it's going to initialize that first hub spoke, if that's the way that's going to go. It's going to have centralized connectivity. It's also going to have centralized identity and access, right? So it's going to start, cementing those first additional components. And then the last part is the policy compliance, which I think is going to be one of the most important parts. So all these components are in place. And the luxury of that is now whenever you migrate, well, everything's going to fall in place in there, right? And you're going to have a structure. A lot of the problems that I see within our customers, within our partners, it's because there was a problem that was probably associated with something that would have been resolved on this, right? And this should have been one of those first steps. It's always good to implement it, even if you have to retrofit it. So always consider that, especially if you don't have a landing zone right now. Now, after you're in the environment, right? I was talking about the security, the governance, the management. Well, Microsoft also has a framework for that. It's called the Azure Well-Architected Framework. There's 5 pillars on that. And when we talk about pillars, we're talking about these columns of best practices, of recommendations, of guidelines. Most of these, right, can you've probably had to do in the past, right? Cost optimization. You're going to notice it's going to be making sure you can save costs, right? There's performance efficiency. It wants to make sure that you can quickly in scale out, right? Be able to perform at your max capacity with scalability and elasticity, which is core components of a cloud architecture. You also want to make sure that you worry about operational excellence, security, and reliability, right? Disaster recovery, and business continuity. All these pillars form a well architected environment. And the reason of this is because as you grow, a lot of the cloud environment is not going to be visible to you, right? You lock in a portal, you connect through a command ladder, you connect through CLI. You're not going to see all your environment, right? You're not going to see all these resources listed out. You're not going to be following through a Excel sheet with thousands of resources. So it's important to make sure that the well-architected framework is in place. So as you move forward in your already instilling these components through different tools like Azure Policy, through monitoring, then you can visually see it and you can grow your environment and make sure it's always well architected, right? So I do want to dive into a couple of these because as you're going to see, Microsoft actually has for each of these components a framework that they tie to. And it's not specifically called out, but the way that these frameworks are being used now, leveraging, they tie directly to some of these. Now, if we go through the WAF real quick, the WAF pillars, you're going to see again, reliability is designed for failure, making sure that you have availability zones, your redundancy. It's going to make you make sure that you have a continuous environment, even if there's some type of failure, some type of disaster. Security is obviously applying security principles. It's all focused on that. Cost optimization, it's going to save you costs. It's going to save you money down the road and make sure you stretch your dollar as much as you can. Operational excellence is being able to continuously automate your deployments, be able to continuously automate your drive and your improvement in your environment. And then performance efficiency is going to establish those performance baselines, right? So you can make sure that you're being able to efficiently be able to produce test releases and be able to continuously grow. So I'll pause right here if anyone has any questions real quick, because I wanted to dive a little bit deeper in some of these pillars, but I wanted to make sure I give everyone enough time to ask any questions. Okay, Barry, we're good to continue?
Yeah, no questions so far. So yeah, please continue.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about cost optimization, right? For the most part, when we consider cost optimization, we consider stuff as right sizing, auto scaling, making sure that we're not spending money if you don't necessarily need to scale out. The whole PaaS versus IaaS conversations in it. What solution is going to be better? Is it better to save a little bit of money, have less management? All those questions. Reserve instances. We want to talk about tagging and chargeback components that are very, very important for cost optimization. Specifically here is going to be the tagging, and then waste elimination, right? We always have to be conscious about that. Well, all these components are actually part of a framework called the FinOps framework, right? FinOps is taking those principles and actually extending it. How can you create a FinOps mentality, right, or a FinOps opportunity or culture? Because, like I said before, this aren't rules. This is more principles that you can follow, that you can instill in your environment. Well, what the FinOps framework does is it allows you to be able to adopt these cost-cutting measures, but most importantly, before it even saves money, it's meant to get the most money out of your most performance out of your money, right? It's meant to be able to say, if we're using this EM, how can I either optimize it or refactor it where it actually is producing more money than it is now, right? So that CPU, if it's producing $100 per hour, well, how can I make it produce 200? How can I make it more efficient? And the method that you apply this is you first have visibility of it, right? So crawl, you're going really slow. You're looking at your span. You're looking at your visibility components. Then you start walking, right? You start implementing components. This could be tagging. This could be actually showback, letting your engineers, your DevOps, letting all the teams know, hey, this is your spend. How can we get better? How can we save money? How can we do things that will actually allow us to reach to a goal? And then at the end of this, all that cost saving is going to be in the run phase, where it's full chargeback. You have predictive forecasting on your costs. You have anomaly detection. If something is running more spend that you expect, you will get these detections. It's the principles of being able to be financially conscious, but be able to control their own environment, right? So if you think about how the pillar gives you those first initial components, how can you maximize that thought process of cost optimization, right? And for the most part, I think the FinOps framework aligns with this, where not only does it allow you to implement those first components, but it allows you to expand it to become a FinOps program within your organization. Now, there's also a FinOps toolkit specifically that Azure creates, and it allows you to use some of those components that we talk about within FinOps. It allows you to use cost summary reports and rate optimization specifically for Azure resources. There's the focus schemas, which the focus schemas are actually templates that can give you a structure to be able to compare prices and billing between different cloud providers. So this is a very important tool, especially if you're considering hybrid or multi-cloud. And then it gives you other tools like templates and modules to be able to implement these FinOps components. It's a collection of tools. You can download it if you look up for FinOps tool or FinOps toolkit for Azure, and it works great, especially if you're introducing these components within your organization. Now, the next one is security, right? And it makes clear sense when we talk about nowadays that how is security reflected within Azure and Microsoft products? Well, we start talking about zero trust security model. Zero trust has three main philosophies: verify everything, make sure you're always applying least privileges, and always assume breach, right? So you can minimize your blast radius, making sure that if something is compromised, it's limited to wherever it's being compromised. Now, Microsoft extends that a little bit further. It has security domains that these three principles should be applied to. So, for example, if we're talking about identity, how can you use the principle of assume breach? Well, for identity, instead of giving someone a server administrator role or privileges, you want to minimize it. Maybe just give them a service role. Maybe just give them a DHCP administrator, right? You want to assume that. So it takes each of these concepts and it applies it to security domains within their environment. So you have identity, you have endpoints, so normal desktops, day-to-day laptops. You have applications, then you have your data layer, right? So all the data. You have your infrastructure, and then you have your networking. And Microsoft specifically caters all their products, especially in their security suite, to be able to highlight and protect you from each of these pillars, right? So they take the principles of zero trust and create a mechanism to be able to secure their products domains. And like I said, these are pretty much the pillars that Microsoft will, or the domains that Microsoft will use. You'll see how some of these products, for example, identity, well, you should use conditional access. You should use MFA. If you're talking about data, Purview is a perfect tool for that. You can apply sensitivity labels. You can apply DLP policies. If we're talking about endpoints, Microsoft Intune will be the tool of choice for that. When we start talking about infrastructure, so it's going to be server infrastructures, VMs, then you start talking about a couple of variety products and features, just-in-time access, the privileged identity, obviously, and then Defender for Cloud products. When we talk about applications, and this does include M365 products, we start talking about Defender for Cloud apps, and again, conditional access for any type of access through mobile phones and stuff like that. And then finally, networking, which includes the networking applied in Azure. You want to start thinking about segmenting your networks using NSGs and firewalls, right? You want to make sure that you have east-west segmentation, north-south segmentation, and you start controlling that blast radius, right? So if there's some type of infiltration or some type of breach, then they're controlled within certain components. Now, Microsoft gives a very good tool called the Microsoft Security Reference Architecture, and this is a massive PowerPoint, but it gives you anything and everything you need to know about cybersecurity for Microsoft. It includes reference architectures. It includes huge mappings of all their products and where it aligns to zero trust. And then it allows you to modernize. It gives you a plan of modernization and adoption of the cybersecurity reference architectures and zero trust within your Microsoft environment. And we're going to dive a little bit into operational excellence now. Now, when you think about operational excellence, right, you want to understand that you have to be able to build and test and deploy. And you want to do it in small, frequent releases because that allows you to be able to modernize quickly. You want to have continuous improvement. And the most important thing is you want to break these silos, right? When you talk about DevOps, right? And again, think of the framework of what it is. You want to make sure that there's no silos between everyone knows what's going on between each other. And that very quick and fast pipeline is going very quickly through your release process. So, and actually, I did want to mention Security Future Initiative. I did, as you realize, I skipped this one, but SFI is actually a part of the security pillar. Now, the reason this is very important is because FSI was part of an initiative that Microsoft had a couple of years ago. Whenever Microsoft decided, or they implemented security, they decided, you know what? I don't think our customers are implementing security to the level that they need to take. And so Microsoft committed to have security as one of their highest priorities. With this, they started to implement different changes within different products, right? So one of the things that most people saw was MFA, right? Everyone that was using Microsoft services started to notice that MFA was required for a lot of things. Well, that was because of this initiative. They said, if customers are not going to implement MFA, then we need to make sure that it's being implemented, right? And so those are one of those components. And it's still ongoing, okay? It's still going to be something that Microsoft is going to come back and say, if we see something that should be a security component that no one is using, then we're going to implement it in a way that the customers have to adopt it quicker than if they weren't going to adopt it at all, right? So you might see SFI, you'll see articles, they create a CSRD report, and you look at on that, it's released every year. I want to say it's released during the November timeframe. It tells you pretty much a report on what they saw in the trends, but then they saw you the differences from the previous years. It's a very good report, you know, especially if you're in the security realm. So I do apologize, but that should have been in the security component. But let's continue with operational excellence. So when we were talking about that, right, one of the key components is going to be infrastructure of code, right? That allows you to store your code in source control, right? It keeps that operational excellence. It keeps you in templates. It keeps you from losing your code. It keeps you from rebuilding from scratch. And sometimes you can even use it for other purposes like disaster recovery. You also talk about the pipelines and continuous improvement, continuous delivery, leveraging Microsoft's other property, right? GitHub. And it also allows you to do a little bit more observability, and you can track different components, and obviously runbooks and playbooks come into play because that brings in automation. And so DevOps really ties to operational excellence, right? The main components of that is going to be the CI/CD pipeline. And as you move forward, if you think about how DevOps is supposed to be used within an environment, it's supposed to break those silos, right? So these teams have clear ownership. It's going to be a blameless culture. There's going to be runbooks. There's going to be automation that works continuous to have continuous deployment automation. And then you should also have observability where you can see where, you know, all this information be tracked, because again, at the end of the day, you got to remember it's continuous deployment. And so with continuous deployment, you have to have continuous improvement. And the DevOps framework is something that's repeatable, right? It's going to be a circle. You plan, you build, you deliver, and you operate, right? And it's a continuous circle. With this, Microsoft, and just like any other cloud provider, have provided various tools for DevOps. Microsoft actually has their DevOps product that they use, and it has pipelines in there. They also leverage GitHub for their repository and their actions to be able to push this out. And they also have many, many tools within their Azure stack that will help with most of these components, most of these pillars. And at the end of the day, what they want you to do is be able to operate your day-to-day operations at the highest peak. And to be able to do that again, it's just having a DevOps framework in mind. Now, the future software, I think it's pertinent that, before I end this call, that we talk about AI, right? And in all these columns that we were talking about, and all these disciplines, they're all going to be affected by AI. But most importantly is going to be the DevOps. And the reason that I feel that, one is we've already seen it, right? We've seen software delivery from a static website to a static application or a dynamic application to actual different, brand new engagements with IT in every corner. But as an architect, right, we can use these agentic tools, right, these agentic AI tools to become a different type of architect, right? And not necessarily agentic DevOps, but in my day-to-day, that's how it makes me work much faster, right? To be able to produce things that before would take hours and hours and hours. So if I take those concepts and think about how it's going to affect DevOps, well, first of all, GitHub, and especially GitHub Copilot, will be able to do a lot of the autonomous day-to-day issue to PR workflow, right? Revise those, review those, and be able to give context to whoever's going to review it to implement that PR much quicker than if that person was doing it by itself. It's going to have, obviously, code generation, which is the most popular component of AI within the IT today. We also have integration for test generation, so it can actually do debugging and testing in the back end. And then code edits across various depots. It's also going to be multi-agent, right, orchestration, which is what agentic AI is going to be. You can plan agents, you can tell them to give specific tasks, and then you have MCP tools that they can leverage as well. And then, again, if you think about the pipeline that I was referring to earlier, they'll be able to do the whole stack from reviewing PRs to auto remediation, and then even rollbacks and just pipeline configuration. So the age of AI is going to introduce, all these pillars. It's going to revolutionize these pillars, but I think DevOps is going to be the one that's going to be affected the most. And then finally, we're going to get to performance efficiency. Now, this is one of those tasks in your environment that is not rewarded very highly, right? No one knows about it, but it's what keeps the lights on, right? It's load testing, it's performance monitoring, it's scaling without anyone even noticing. And to do all that, you have to establish those baselines, right? So whenever I think about what the thought process is for this, then what Microsoft has created is some products, and they name it chaos engineering, right? They want you to understand that for you to be able to test, and this is going to be mostly your either your environments or the way you're applying some of your principles or applications, you have to test it, right? You have to stress it out a little bit. And so that's what they use with a couple of products that they have. Now, Azure Chaos Students in particular does this, right? It's going to have your environment in a state that it will introduce different components that normally it's very hard to reproduce, right? So let's say an outage, you'll be able to test if it can actually control DR or business continuity. Other parts like injection faults and VM shutdowns, right? So if you have your environment and you can actually shut down, what is going to occur? Introduce that chaos. With chaos engineering, you can test not only how it's operating now, but how it's going to operate if something actually happened. And it'll document findings. It'll be able to give you ideas for remediation. And then you can rerun those experiences as much as possible. So this framework is very important because, again, most people do not realize that their system is vulnerable until it actually happens, right? And so this allows us to test all these features and all this through a fault library. And the fault library that Microsoft has in their GitHub actually introduces these different little tests. And you can see some of them right listed here. CPU pressure, right? So if it's running hot, VM shutdown, DNS outages, which is very important, network latency, and then obviously pod chaos. So in a nutshell, right? Learn to be able to identify what framework is needed and master that, right? Implement it in your company. Be an evangelist in your company to be able to bring these in because these are going to be those guardrails that you can go from being uh, uh, a very popular engineer or being a very stressed out engineer, right? And you can adopt these frameworks and be able to keep yourself in an overall well architected environment, then it's less stressful for everyone involved, including the SRE engineers and the DevOps engineers and your architects and the application and dev teams. But if you do not follow these principles now, then even 2-3 years from now, or it could be 2-3 months from now, you're going to start seeing these cracks, right? And you're going to realize, what, I should have done this before. And that's the last thing you want to hear as an IT is being able to say, man, I wish I implemented it whenever I first thought about it. Okay. So I will pause here. I'll take any questions, and I do appreciate your time.